Alright, the first Silent Hill game from 1999, one of the classic survival horror games where you found yourself lost within fog, holding on to your limited resources, constantly checking your map, while trying to make sense of a mysterious and monstrous world on the boundaries of reality, and asking everyone if they had seen a little girl with short black hair. Even aliens, depending on the ending of course. But although the feeling of helplessness was a trademark of the horror genre back then, you wouldn't necessarily equate the Silent Hill franchise with challenge. But what if you would force yourself to go through the game on the highest difficulty with the weakest weapon in the game? The kitchen knife found in the cafe that you pretty soon would discover to be, well, practically useless and quickly being replaced by the at least somewhat viable metal pipe. Well, in this walkthrough I will show you step by step how to survive Silent Hill on hard difficulty, knife only. But enjoy the rest of the amazing intro first and then we'll get started. Okay then, let's get started. Now, as you know, the beginning of the game is purely introductory and ends with a mandatory death. So let me use the start of the game to go over the basics of a knife-only playthrough. But before that, I need to mention that the version of the game I'm using is the European Pal edition, not the American version. Now, as far as I know, there is no actual gameplay differences, other than that you will notice that the first enemy type we encounter has a different design. But I thought I would mention it anyway, because there might be small differences that I'm simply not aware of. So do at least keep it in mind. So, knife only, what are the basics? Well, first of all, I have also done a knife only guide for Silent Hill 3, so it's only natural for me to draw some comparisons. And the main difference is that it's actually not possible to do a pure knife only playthrough in Silent Hill 1. At least, not under normal circumstances. Now the reason for this is because the centipede boss, known as Twin Feeler, the one that you encounter in the shopping mall, cannot be hit with the knife, as you cannot aim downward. It can be done with other melee weapons, but not with the knife. However, there is a glitch used in speedruns that is fairly easy to perform that allows you to skip the centipede boss altogether, which does allow for a pure knife only run. So when we get to that point, I will explain in detail how to perform that glitch. However, in case you are unwilling to perform that glitch, then the metal pipe would be the weapon of choice for that fight, as it is the weapon with the lowest damage output after the knife, which is more or less the point of this type of challenge run anyway. But to emphasize, for a pure knife only run, a glitch will be required.
Where are you going? Hey, wait! Stop!
Now, the main principle of a knife-only run, although it's not a rule per se, is that it's almost similar to a pacifist run, where you only kill the enemies that you are required to take down in order to beat the game. Given that we'll skip the centipede boss fight, that leaves the 4 remaining bosses and the first flying enemy that we encounter in the cafe after the intro sequence. There's also one nurse enemy that I choose to take down near the end of the game, which is not mandatory, but it is recommended. So to emphasize, it's not a rule that you cannot kill regular enemies, it's simply a matter of it not really being viable. The knife is so weak and the enemies are such tanks on hard mode that it's not feasible to do it with the limited healing items that the game provides. And especially not with the limited moveset that you have. So other than explaining how to defeat the bosses with such a weak weapon, this guide will mainly consist of guiding you past the enemies in the most efficient way possible. Now, I'm not a speedrunner, so it's not technically about being fast, but given that there are a limited amount of healing items in the game, you will want to spend the least amount of time in the vicinity of enemies. Especially because new enemies can spawn after certain tasks are performed. So not killing enemies is not exactly the same thing as not having to deal with enemies. They are not always that easy to avoid. And speaking of which, the first enemies are completely unavoidable, as you are meant to die here, as you get the first taste of the surreal nature of the game, where the way you came from is suddenly blocked off, and you are yet unaware of how the sirens in the distance signal the shift into the other world. I'm leaving all the cutscenes in, so this is a complete playthrough of the entire game, and after the cutscene we'll pick up the knife and go over the basics of knife combat, as we'll have to take down the first mandatory enemy.
What is this? What's going on here? Was I dreaming?
How do you feel?
Oh, like I've been run over by a truck. But I'm all right, I guess.
Glad to hear it. You from around here? Why don't you tell me what happened?
Wait a second, I'm just a tourist. I came here for a vacation. I just got here. I don't know what happened. I'd like to find out myself.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen a little girl? Just turned 7 last month, short, black hair. My daughter.
Sorry. The only person I've seen in this town is you.
Where is everybody?
I'd tell you if I knew, believe me. But from what I can tell, something bizarre's going on. That's all I know. What's your name?
Harry. Harry Mason.
Sybil Bennett. I'm a police officer from Brams, the next town over. The phones are all dead, and the radio too. I'm going back to call in some reinforcements. Hold it. Where do you think you're going?
My daughter. I've got to find her.
No way. It's dangerous out there.
In that case, I need to find her now. Cheryl's my little girl. I can't just leave her out there by herself.
Have you got a gun?
No.
Take this, and hope you don't have to use it. Now listen to me. Before you pull the trigger, know who you're shooting. And don't do it unless you have to. And don't go blasting me by mistake. Got it?
Yeah, thanks.
You do best to stay nearby. I'll be back with help as quick as I can.
Well, we're not going to blast Sybil by mistake, but we are going to stab her on purpose. So first order of business is to pick up the flashlight, map, healing items, and of course the knife itself. And then we have the first opportunity to save the game. So after you pick up all the items, make sure that you do it, because the pterodactyl that will come crashing in through the window, and you can see a glimpse of it already after you pick up the map, is a lot harder to take down than you might expect. It will pretty much feel like a mini boss fight. Now, when it comes to the gun, we cannot actually just ignore it, we need to empty it first, and don't pick up any new ammo. This is an actual requirement to beat the game under these restrictions, because of how the final boss fight is designed, as I will explain later on in the playthrough. Especially do not pick up hunting rifle ammo. You can literally soft lock the game if you do and make it unbeatable. Okay, so now we have the knife, and all you can do with it is a single or double sideways slash or a forward thrusting stab attack. It depends on the enemy which attack is most effective. And contrary to the third game, there was no parry in this game yet. There is no way to block any attack. So you will need to avoid everything, and that can be hard to do with these controls. All you can do is run, strafe sideways, and do this little awkward jump backwards. But there's nothing that actually qualifies as a dodge, so it all comes down to spacing. I'm not concerned with what rank I get, so I pretty much save the game any opportunity I get. In fact, I save way more than I even need to. But it's a good habit, as you can reload when you take too much damage to save your limited healing items. Okay then, time for the first knife fight, and on hard mode, the pterodactyl will kill you in 4 hits, so you cannot just tank hits. This fight actually requires some strategy, especially because if you just try to take it head on, you are going to be swatting at empty air for the most part. The knife really is not that much better than a toothpick, and the enemy will easily outdamage you. But there is a way to make it manageable. I don't execute this strategy perfectly, as I do get hit, but in principle you could do this without taking any damage at all. Alright, as soon as the enemy bursts through the window, you will fall down, and if you attack with a double sideways slash, the moment you stand up, the second slash will always hit the enemy. So that's basically a free hit, but then immediately get out of the way and run over to the most right chair at the bar and walk up against it. It looks weird, but this helps you to get in position, as moving forward will make it more likely that you will hit the enemy, and the chair prevents you from moving forward too quickly. Then run to the other end and immediately turn around and run back again. Now if you mistime it, you will take a hit. In fact, you will see me take a hit. And I take another hit when I hesitate before attacking, because then the enemy will simply hit you first. It does require some timing. I know it sounds weird that walking up against a chair is beneficial, but trust me, it really helps. Because when you don't, you are very likely to just constantly miss your attacks or just exchange hits. And again, 4 hits will kill you on hard mode. So you do need to be very careful.
This is not a dream. What's happening to this place?
Alright, not flawless execution, but it got the job done. And hopefully it shows why it's not viable to just go through the game trying to kill any enemy you see with this weapon. So from now on, until the mandatory boss fight in the school, we're going pacifist mode. And the focus is on avoiding enemies as effectively as possible, while picking up as many healing items as we can. And as I said, this is not a speedrun, but it is important to not spend too much time in areas that are filled with enemies. So it's important to take an effective route through the game. Now you are expected to go back to the alley from the intro first, and then enter one of the houses where you find a map with the location of 3 keys. However, you can pick them up before all of that, which means you don't have to backtrack and go past the enemies on the streets a second time. And other than keys, we are going to collect as much healing items as possible. After all, there are a fixed amount of healing items in the game, so in a manner of speaking, you have a maximum possible amount of hit points for the entire playthrough, and every item you leave behind decreases that total amount. After all, there is no alternative way to get your health back. Not even dying and continuing will restore your life bar. Now, having said that, I do leave some healing items behind on purpose. When trying to get them entails taking as much or even more damage than that item would be able to heal in the first place. It has to be worth the risk. But avoiding damage is always better than healing it, of course. And while you're on the streets, the most dangerous enemies are the pterodactyls, as they can move faster than you, and because of the fog, they can suddenly appear in front of you. So that means that when the radio signals that enemies are nearby, always be ready to move away if an enemy suddenly pops up in front of you. And when a flyer is behind you, listen for the sound of its wings. The closer they get, the louder the sound. Because they can move faster than you also need to be ready to move aside if one approaches you from behind. If necessary, quickly running in a small circle will be enough to avoid them. There are a lot of places in the game where you have limited space to move around and enemies close in on you very quickly. So with the tank controls of this game, it can be quite tough to avoid enemies because of that. For example, when you run at an angle against a wall or obstacle or whatever it may be, you can still move forward, but you will run significantly slower. So sometimes you have to be very precise with your movements. Now there is actually a button combination for a 180-degree quick turn that is actually never explained within the game itself. So it's not unlikely that you didn't even know that that move existed in this game. The way you do it is by pressing L1 and R1 at the same time while tapping down on the D-pad. Unfortunately, I think it's rather tricky to pull off. Maybe I'm just clumsy, but it usually doesn't really work for me. I only did it once in this entire playthrough, but in principle it would help you to turn around much quicker, so do keep it in mind. And speaking of things you might not be aware of, there's actually a building you can go into near the top of the map, where some extra healing items and a save pad can be found. And beyond that, you can find the wreckage of your car, in which a health drink can be found. Unfortunately, I did forget about that one at the time, so unfortunately I skipped that one. The building we're looking for is at a corner and there are dogs on the right side. So run down the street rather than on the sidewalk, otherwise they will start chasing you. And as soon as you get to the crossing, you know that you are at the right place, and of course you can check the map at any time. Now I do have to mention that despite healing items being massively important, I do in fact end the game with a whole load of healing items left. Basically what it comes down to is that they are not as important as in the third game. So I went into this playthrough with the same mindset as for the third game, where every single healing item is immensely valuable. In fact, I finished that knife-only playthrough on hard mode with only 2 healing items left, having missed almost none. So what it comes down to is that a knife-only playthrough in the third game on hard mode is way harder than in the first one. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, hard difficulty does not affect how many healing items there are in total in this game. In Silent Hill 3 there are less on hard difficulty. And secondly, in the third game, the game becomes more difficult the farther you get into the game, and it ends in a 45-minute long endurance test of a final boss fight. However, in this game, the difficulty is basically in reverse. The first boss at the end of this video, in the school, is the hardest part of the entire playthrough. And the bosses basically get easier the farther you get. And the reason that the first boss is the hardest is because he can kill you in one hit. So healing items don't help you with that anyway. But of course, for the sake of this guide, it is helpful to show where all the healing items are. And it also means that if you want to try this yourself, you can make far more mistakes than I do and still make it through the game. Alright, I should actually have gone right to pick up the health drink in the wreckage, but I forgot to do that. So now I'm headed to the alleyway from the start. That is where you find the metal pipe, which is a requirement if you don't want to or cannot use the glitch to skip Twin Feeler. So at least it's advisable to take it with you. Over here we're going to encounter a bunch of dogs, and they are rather quick, so it's important to keep running. I almost took a hit because I bumped up against a wall. By the way, if that happens against a door, just tap X regardless, because it does not prevent you from going through. And a bit further ahead on the other side of the gate is a single dog, and because of the camera angles he is a lot more tricky to avoid. But as a general rule of thumb, you can push yourself past the dog even when it jumps at you, as long as he doesn't hit you dead on. Or better said, if it's at a wide enough angle, he won't actually bite you and you can just push yourself past him.
Isn't this Cheryl's sketchbook? She's at the school.
What's really interesting about this game is that it contains environmental storytelling. The areas you visit aren't merely arbitrary locations, but actually can tell you a great deal of what is going on. There's even more or less a chronology to it, as the school is about Alessa's life prior to when she got burned alive, and what led to that event in the first place, and the hospital you visit next is about after that event. Now it is of course quite different to the second game, where the symbolism is much stronger, but before the third game was made, there was actually a lot more room for speculation for the first game, as there was no canonical ending yet. Speaking of which, that is the ending I'm going for in this playthrough. So the standard good ending, where Harry leaves with the baby, but Sybil unfortunately dies in the amusement park. After all, I don't want to skip yet another boss, but of course if you want to, with the red liquid, you can avoid having to fight Sybil altogether. However, I advise against that, it's kind of a waste. Oh, by the way, you may have noticed it from the camera angles just then, but it is sometimes necessary to hold L2 when running past enemies to keep the camera behind Harry. It's not exactly perfect camera control and it doesn't always work, but it at least can prevent you at times from running straight at the camera, unable to see what's even in front of you. So remember the L2 button, it can be a lifesaver. Alright then, we already have the keys, but unfortunately you cannot collect the key to the house itself before Harry himself knows where it is. We already know that it's hidden in the dog house, but you won't be able to actually find it there before you find the hint further down the road. And on the other side of that road is actually another healing item, but I purposely skipped that one because it's guarded by 3 dogs. So as I've said before, some healing items are not worth the risk. If I look a little hesitant here, it's because I was thinking whether I should save the game or not. But again, there's actually no penalty for saving anyway. It's not like Resident Evil where you have ink ribbons. Regardless, there are lots of save points in the first part of the game. In fact, the school bus outside of the school, as well as one of the first rooms inside the school, both have a save pad as well. But the point is that unless you care about what rank you get at the end, there's no real reason to not save the game whenever you can. There's another healing item I'm leaving behind in the top left corner of the map, but only for now. It's much safer to pick it up later on in the playthrough on your way to the resort area. Moreover, we've collected quite a few healing items already, and there are 2 more on the school bus. In case you don't know where that is, because it's easy to miss, when you get to the front door of the school, instead of going in already, move a bit further down the road and there you will find it with 2 health drinks and a save pad inside. Now, regarding your health, there's actually one more thing to take into account, and that is that it's not merely the colors that indicate how much health you have left. It might seem initially that the amount of damage you take, or how much a regular health drink heals, is inconsistent. But the way your HP is divided is more or less high green, high orange, high red, low red. So when a health drink heals you from red to green, you are then actually not at full health, nor were you at the lowest possible health. So that does mean that you might think that you are fully healed when you are not. Despite all that, I do suspect that there is an RNG factor at play when it comes to damage output of enemies regardless. But as a general rule, just check your health regularly when you take damage. After all, damage is permanent unless you take a healing item anyway. When exiting the bus, hold the square button so you can immediately push yourself past the dog. The game can be rather sadistic that way, where you have to already know what's coming in order to prevent taking a hit. Fortunately, now we're going through the school, the areas get smaller, and because enemies always have the same starting position when an area is loaded, you can learn those starting positions and plan out your movement through a room. Of course, as soon as enemies start moving, RNG gets involved, but being aware of where enemies will be initially is a major advantage. Remember that in a regular playthrough, you remove enemies by killing them. But in this type of a playthrough, they are always in your way, and in fact more can spawn after certain tasks are performed, like solving a puzzle. Speaking of which, there are 3 puzzles that need to be solved in order to progress to the otherworld version of the school. Well, technically only the one for the silver medallion can really be called a puzzle, and a very difficult one at that. In fact, back in '99, I had to use the internet to get the answer. You know, back when you first had to hear and beg your mom to get off the phone. But anyway, these 3 tasks have to be done in order, so you are forced to backtrack. However, you can at least unlock the door to the boiler room after getting the gold medallion. So that way you only have to make 2 relatively small trips through the school. And that's good because avoiding enemies here can be a bit tricky. The hallways may look wide enough, but given the clunky movement and the fact that enemies can lunge at you, you have far less room than you might think. So make sure to save the game first and of course pick up the healing items in that room. Alright, the enemies in the courtyard are easy to avoid, but as soon as you enter the door, you have to immediately turn left as there's an enemy in front of you, and then run up to the opposite side of the hallway to get around the second enemy. So it's a bit of an awkward zigzag, and you have to do this again for the second trip. Then, after you go upstairs, go into the first door you see and then again into the first door you see to pick up the chemical. When you leave the room, immediately turn left and go into the lab without hesitation to pick up the gold medallion. Now, as I said, we're not going back yet, we're taking the long way around to unlock the door to the boiler room. And this also allows us to pick up another first aid kit. Now, when you leave the lab, you will need to wait a second for the enemy in front of you to move towards you, so you can run past it. However, the timing is rather precise, because the enemy behind you will approach you, and if you wait too long, he will grab you. Once you enter the door, enter left to pick up the first aid kit. Don't be alarmed because of the radio. There's one of those ghosts inside the room, so you aren't really in any danger. Instead of going through the hallway, it might be better to go through the classrooms. The first room is empty, however the second one has 2 enemies inside and the camera is facing towards you. So to counteract this, hold L2 while you enter the room to make the camera face away from you. And move all the way right, because as you see, I almost get grabbed by the second enemy. Oh, another close call. As I said, you really don't have as much space as you think. And when you go downstairs, don't run straight ahead, but wait a second and move right, otherwise you will run straight into an enemy. After you unlock the door, you are back in the first hallway near the entrance of the school, and because we unlock that door, it will give us quick access to the boiler room later on. But first we will need to place the gold medallion, because we need to progress the time on the clock tower first. That's the reason why you cannot just make a single trip. So now we have to go upstairs the same way we did for the gold medallion, So again, move immediately left once you enter the door and zigzag around the second enemy by running to the opposite side of the hallway. Instead of going down the hallway, if you move through the classrooms, you can pick up another health drink. But there are 2 enemies inside and the camera is facing towards you. So again, use the L2 button to see where the enemies are. You'd think that compared to the old Resident Evil games with its fixed camera angles, the camera would not be your enemy in Silent Hill, but there are definitely many instances in this game where the camera angles can screw you over. Alright, so now it's time for the piano puzzle. And once you understand the riddle, it seems quite obvious, well, but that's basically with any riddle anyway. But I'm sure I wasn't the only one who initially had no idea what to do here. But let me explain how the puzzle is constructed. The title of the poem tells us that the birds are silent. And when you check the piano, some keys make normal sounds and some make some weird kind of noise. Not exactly silent, but whatever, you cannot play a tune with those at least. So those are the silent keys. And the keys on the piano are white and black, and so are the birds in the poem. So a white bird is a white silent key, and a black bird is a black silent key. And then the progression of the poem gives us the order. The greedy pelican is designated first, so the first silent white key. Then the dove is said to be at the far end, so the last silent white key. But the raven, a black bird, is said to fly higher than the dove. So that would be the silent black key beyond the final silent white key. The swan is a little less obvious because no precise location is given, but we know it's a silent white key because it's a swan, and that it's located next to another white bird. And on the piano there are only 2 silent white keys next to each other, namely the one next to the dove. The poem is rather vague about the crow, but it would simply have to be the remaining silent black key. So that's the solution to the puzzle. Doesn't seem too hard to figure out, but that's with hindsight. Back in 1999, I had no idea what to do here. And of course, English isn't my first language, so I have been playing games in English even before I could speak it. So these texts were far less clear to me back then. Anyway, now we have the silver medallion, and this time we might as well go through the hallway. And here I show a strategy that's important later on in the Otherworld version of the school as well. If there's not enough room yet to evade an enemy in a hallway, stand against one of the walls and wait until the enemy moves to that side until there's enough room to run past him on the other side of the hallway. And this is also how you evade 2 enemies in a hallway at the same time, as you will see later on, where the trick is to wait until the enemies are behind each other on one side of the hallway. Alright, so because we previously unlocked the door to the boiler room, we don't have to take the long way around. However, as I've said before, new enemies can spawn after performing certain tasks, and the hallway near the entrance of the school now suddenly has 2 enemies inside. And they are really close. You will have to wait for just a moment and then run around them counterclockwise. Then take the stairs down towards the boiler room. You will have to pick the left door. Oh wait, you have to pick the other left door. Right, the other left door. Have I mentioned already that the camera can still be your enemy in this game? Well, sometimes even using L2 cannot help you out. I guess it was just too much to ask to keep the camera behind Harry at pretty much all times. Well, anyway, we're going into the Otherworld version of the school now, so it's advisable to save the game first, because you don't have direct access to a save pad after you progressed a bit in the Otherworld. Here you see that strategy I talked about, luring enemies behind each other on one side of a hallway. But even then you have very little space to work with.
Where am I? Have I been here before? I don't remember this being here before.
Yeah, there's some stellar voice acting in this game, right? Well, anyway, go through the only door you can enter and immediately enter the door in front of you to pick up a first aid kit. Once you leave the room, immediately turn right and stick to the wall and enter the next door to pick up the rubber ball. Use the hallway strategy again. Unfortunately, there's a bench in the way, giving you even less room to work with. Moreover, the second enemy is too far back, so you actually have to move left again to avoid him. Immediately turn right and stick to the wall to enter the next door as soon as possible to prevent getting bitten by the cockroaches. Then enter the first door on the left to pick up the keycard. Hold L2 while entering the next room, because the camera is in your disadvantage again. In fact, even while holding L2, it's still difficult to avoid the enemies. And after exiting the room, before you continue, move back into the hallway to pick up a health drink on the bench. Alright, so now we can save the game again, and there are 2 more healing items in this room as well. I must say that compared to Silent Hill 3 and its reduced amount of healing items on hard mode, this game is kind of showering you in healing items. Speaking of which, the best kind is of course the ampoule, and one of those is in the next room over. But it's very likely that you will take a hit in that room. I fortunately had some luck, or better said, I reloaded the game. But even if you do take a hit, it's basically like exchanging a health drink for an ampoule. So unless you get stuck, it's definitely worth the risk. And to prevent getting stuck, you can wait in front of the wheelchair where you find that ampoule and wait for the enemies to come close and then run the other way around back to the door. Alright, this part looks a bit tricky because an enemy is right in front of the door that you need to enter. However, you can just run behind him, and as long as you don't hesitate, he won't turn around and attack you. I suppose he was actually designed to first walk away from the door and not be directly in your way. For the next room, hold L2 again while you enter, because there are again enemies in front of you with the camera naturally facing towards you. And in the next room, immediately run towards the door to trigger the cutscene. Unfortunately, it's rather cheap, because as soon as the cutscene ends, you might get bitten by a cockroach before you even have the chance to move away. So that's mostly a matter of RNG.
Cheryl!
Well, that's lame. Anyway, stick left and go up to the roof. That's where you have to use the rubber ball to plug up the drain, so you can wash the key down to the courtyard. You do have to look at the key first in order to be able to place the rubber ball. Okay, now go all the way down the stairs, but don't run straight ahead on the ground floor, but move slightly to the right, otherwise you will run straight into an enemy. Use the by now familiar hallway strategy to safely get into the courtyard to pick up the key that you have just flushed down there. And after that, go back up to the first floor. In the next room, quickly run to the opposite wall and stick to it until you reach the door. The next room has no enemies yet, but there are going to be no less than 4 enemies on the way back. Alright, this hallway simply requires a bit of luck while you try to get around the enemies on the left side, because you cannot use the regular hallway strategy because of the cockroach. Well, hopefully that didn't give you a heart attack, but at least now we have the final key that we need to progress towards the first boss fight. As I said, there are no less than 4 enemies in this room all of a sudden, so make good use of the L2 button, and other than that, it really will come down to your reaction speed, I'm afraid. And for the next room, stick to the wall like before, simply in reverse this time. Use the familiar hallway tactic again, and then use the key you just got to enter the final door on the left. And there you will find the first aid kit on the shelf. In this room we find the fairy tale of the giant lizard who is going to be the boss of this area. And just like the locations in this game aren't random, nor are the bosses. The lizard is not just an arbitrary stronger monster to serve as a boss encounter. Nor is the location where you fight him, namely the boiler room, arbitrary. There are similarities between the noises the boiler makes, the description of the boiler room riddle, and this fairy tale. Basically, when Alessa was at school and heard the strange noises coming from the basement, she imagined the lizard from the fairy tale to be hidden inside the boiler room. A little interesting bit of trivia. Now, for a normal playthrough, this fairy tale explains how to defeat the lizard, namely by shooting into his mouth. But we don't have that option available on a knife-only playthrough. Well, at least not on hard mode. How quick the lizard closes his mouth is tied to the difficulty. On easy, it is actually possible to step in between the jaws, step once, do a quick turn, and move back out before getting devoured. I don't know about differences between the American and European version, But at the very least I can say that on the European version, it is simply impossible to do this on either normal or hard difficulty. So this means that not only do we already need to use the weakest weapon in the game, we also don't have the option to make use of the boss's weakness on hard difficulty. And that's a problem, because that means that this fight is going to be an endurance test. It will take about 20 minutes to defeat the boss this way, which would seem okay given the amount of healing items that we have collected so far. However, the majority of the fight will consist of the second phase, when the boss will open his vertical mouth and tries to eat you. And if he catches you, that is a guaranteed one-hit kill. Doesn't matter how much health you have. If he bites you, it's game over. And that's quite harsh for a 20-minute fight. Only if you are at the very tip of the mouth will you be able to survive, as you will simply get pushed out. But because of the constant danger of instant death and the sheer length of this fight, Splithead is definitely the hardest boss fight in this game. As I've said before, the difficulty of the boss fights in this game is in reverse. Hardest first, easiest last. The opposite of Silent Hill 3. And the opposite of what you basically would expect. But of course, before we get to the second phase, we first have to survive the first phase. And Splithead is a very strangely designed fight. Because he is so slow and so big, you'd think that the best strategy would to be attack him from the side or behind. But that's exactly not the case. Because you cannot even touch this boss without taking damage. Yes, literally touching the boss without it being an attack actually hurts you. So stabbing him from the side or behind, given your limited mobility, means that he is constantly bumping into you, and that will drain your health like crazy. But ironically, when he lunges towards you, an actual attack, even on hard mode, does very little damage. So it's really weird, but you can actually easily tank his headbutts, and you can get to the second phase using relatively few healing items, even on hard difficulty. So the most effective way to handle the first phase is to walk backwards while stabbing. That way he will follow you and occasionally do a headbutt. But when he does, just accept the hit and heal when necessary. It's mainly about getting as much stab attacks in as possible. After all, we want to get through this phase as quickly as we can. Because each time you get one-shotted in the second phase, you will have to go through the first phase again. So just keep walking backwards while stabbing. Heal when necessary until the boss's head splits apart. And then the second phase will start. Alright, now the endurance test begins. The same principle applies of stabbing while walking backwards. Well, technically doing sideways slashes is more effective because then you hit the boss twice, but stabs have slightly more reach. So often I just play it safe and go for stab attacks. But there are two things to watch out for now. One is getting stuck against the side of the arena. Especially because it's so dark, it can be hard to tell where the edge even is. And the second thing to watch out for is when Splithead bumps into you, because this causes you to stagger, and when that happens, immediately be ready to move out of the way. Now, it's not the case that if you don't, you will get bitten and die instantly. The point is that it can happen. It's a matter of RNG whether the boss acts so quick that only an instant reaction can save you, but given that this is unpredictable, you will have to always be alert for it when you stagger and be ready to immediately get out of the way. Remember, a single mistake means having to do the fight all over again. There's one upside to his bite attack though, it's actually quite forgiving when you are already in a running animation. Because if you are between his jaws and running to the side, you will simply get pushed out from between his jaws. So you will see a couple of times where I am in his mouth, but I get pushed out instead of dying. This fight is not only a matter of patience, it's about staying completely focused for almost 20 minutes. Because the boss's speed can vary quite a bit. Sometimes he will move slowly towards you, other times a little bit faster. Sometimes he will do a quick bite, sometimes he will wait a moment before he does it. Constantly be wary of the edges of the arena and constantly watch out for when the boss bumps into you. And hopefully, when you do get caught between his jaws, you are at the very tip of his mouth, so you will get pushed out instead of dying instantly. The best of luck, and I will leave a timestamp in the comment section and description box in case you want to skip to the end of the fight.
What was that? Who in the hell was that?
Alright, we have survived the first boss fight. The toughest part is already behind us, but regardless, there is still a lot ahead of us as well. So if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing so you won't miss the upcoming episodes. And if you're interested, check out my knife only guide for Silent Hill 3 as well. I also have many more challenge run guides for other games, so if you check out the rest of my channel, you might find something you will like as well. Thank you all for watching and stay tuned for episode 2.